37th parallel on America's haunted highway, it's Pixelated Paranormal, your guide to the unusual and the strange.
Old website off, and by then it should all be uploaded. So sweet. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Pixelated Paranormal. Did we decide if we're choosing the returns, whatever? Pixelated Paranormal. We're back at Dinosaur Story. Yeah, that one's good. Cool. Welcome back to the return of Pixelated Paranormal. I am Sean, of course. With me, as always, is Preston. Preston, did you get new glasses, or are those old?
Those are, they're last year's glasses. I just have so many pairs that I didn't wear them that often. So.
Oh, cool, man.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a pair that's like 4 years old.
These are my Indiana Jones, Dr. Jones glasses.
Does that make me short round?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, well, yeah, your boy's about to start working out again, so it won't be round too much longer. Wow, hun. Shayla's in the room, so she's giving color commentary. So yeah, good news is everything is now on Spotify, so audio episodes of the podcast are back, but ironically, they are going to be exclusively on Spotify. Not that they gave us a deal, but instead it's just cheaper to do it that way. So we're stoked. This is episode 354. I think before we go any farther,
you want to give us a deal, Spotify?
Yeah, please do. Yeah, we'll take all the money. Before we get too much deeper, I think it is perfect time to announce a disclaimer. We're going to be getting a little graphic tonight. Not quite as graphic as a late night episode, but pretty fucking graphic. We're going to talk about cannibalism, eating people. We're going to talk about sexuality, mental health, and some other pretty deep stuff. So, just listener beware, listener discretion. Put your kids to bed, because we're going to be talking about some pretty wild shit. And with that, let's kick things off, Preston, with an easy lowball question. What's one of the weirdest things you've eaten as of late in the last 5 years?
I don't know. I haven't eaten anything weird in the last 5 years.
Me neither. I was thinking along the lines of I've had mountain oysters, right?
Yeah,
bull testicles.
That was like 7 years ago that I had bull balls. That's probably the last time I ate something weird. So
yeah. How about escargot? You ever dipped into snails before?
Actually, I made a pasta one time in a cooking class, and we used escargot as a garnish on top of the pasta dish. So I've eaten that. Yeah.
Nice, yeah. I am fortunate enough to say that I've been on 2 or 3 cruises, and on our second cruise, the waiter was really cool, and he just kept bringing us all this weird shit, because normally they're like, hey, you can pick between these different entrees, and as an appetizer, the guy asked if I ever had escargot. I said no, and so for every single night of this 7-day cruise, our waiter would bring out snails, because I thought they tasted really good, just bathed in garlic and butter. Pretty tasty stuff. And then after about the third night, Shayla told me basically I would be quarantined, because escargot also gave me the wickedest farts you could imagine. Peel the wallpaper off the fucking walls kind of bad. So, but yeah, it sounds like you and I haven't really eaten anything too wild and crazy, right? Nothing outside the ordinary. We've both been cooking a lot more lately. So what's one of the most recent dishes you've made that you're just fuck, this was bang, went all out on this one?
I would say the gentleman's breakfast. Man, that was just you take butter, a can of anchovies, and chop them up, and then I did a lemon pepper seasoning, a little bit of lemon juice, and then chives, green onions, and then you let that firm up, you know, and then toast some sourdough bread, and that spread on some sourdough bread with an omelet made with a little bit of mayo in it to make it creamy. Pretty fucking good, man. So
Yeah, you're telling me that recipe, and like sardines and anchovies still kind of turn me off, but I'll try it one of these days, man. I saw the recipe online right after you had told me about it, and supposedly it's really fucking great. It's just you don't want to get too close to people afterwards, with the fish and the garlic and all that. But it sounded pretty interesting. So we haven't made one in a long time, but Shayla and I make a really badass yellow curry with chicken, and I make a raisin and cherry balsamic chutney that will also almost peel the wallpaper off the walls, but it's just fucking awesome. So good stuff all around. Hey, YF9foot says, long time no see, carrot bread with ketchup sandwich. That sounds fucking terrible, buddy. And then a whole pig is also something they've had recently, or cooked recently. Well, the reason why I bring this up is tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about eating an unusual delicacy called long pig, aka people. That's right, folks. We got a little more cannibalism on this episode. I don't think we've talked about too much true crime over the last 10 years. That's not really our lane, but once in a while we come across a story and we just think, holy shit, why not share it? So on this episode, we're going to tell the gory story of the shocking murder of Bernd Brandes by the cannibal murderer Armin Miewes. These are European, like German names, so I'll butcher the shit out of them. You can guarantee it. Let me just get started. Armin Miewes was born on December 1st, 1961, and right out of the gate, he had a pretty troubled childhood. His father reportedly ran out on the family, his older brothers wanted nothing to do with him, and by the tender age of 8, he lost his grandmother, and also his pet cat passed away. So experiencing such a loss at a young age, mixed with the fact that he had a really hard time making any friends, this kid had a really troubling start. Ergo, he decided to make an imaginary little brother named Frankie, based off of the looks and the likes of a fellow classmate named Frank. Now, shortly after the beginning of his puberty, Miewes' mother forbade him from making any girlfriends, after which Miewes began experiencing sexual fantasies about Frankie. That's right, his imaginary friend. But specifically, he desired to become one with Frankie by consuming his body. And over the time of this fascination, it branched out into thoughts of how he could eviscerate Frankie by means of a slaughterhouse. That's right, he had a fantasy of tying up his imaginary friend upside down and just pulling all his guts out like a fish. And this fantasy got so strong that at one point he couldn't help himself. He finally got up the courage to go to school one day, and he almost had the goal to ask his classmate, who he built up this fantasy of Frankie about, to actually cut a piece of his own skin off so that Miewes could eat it, thus kind of completing this fantasy, because he just really wanted to become one with Frankie. But luckily, he chickened out and he couldn't do it out of fear of being ostracized by his other classmates. And so he begins to realize he has this sexual feeling towards both boys and girls, men and women. And shortly after, Miewes soon accepts and embraces the fact that he is now what we would consider bisexual. And then Miewes says that he grew older and his fantasies of cannibalism seemed to almost fade into the background and disappear when he allowed himself to get lucky enough to be in a romantic relationship with either a man or a woman. And he managed to kind of stave off these fantasies and these cannibalistic urges by just kind of bouncing from relationship to relationship. But unfortunately, around 1999, and his mom passed away, and the sudden trauma and loss of his mother caused him to focus once again on the intense desire to eat another human being. And he decided he'd set his sights on a man. After all this carnal lust over men and women, he realized he wanted to set his sights on cannibalism of another male. As an adult, Miewes kept various recordings of TV documentaries about the Vietnam War. He read literature about cannibalistic serial killers such as Fritz Harman and Jeffrey Dahmer. And Miewes also filmed amateur fetish videos for personal usage where he would cover himself in ketchup and pretend to cut himself, or he'd hang himself upside down by these block and tackles. Those are those boots that have the hooks where you can kind of hang upside down and do traction and sit-ups and all that kind of stuff. Or he would take marzipan and minced meat and form them into human phallic shapes. That's right. He's making his own ding-dongs out of mincemeat and marzipan. And he also kept collages of cut-out body parts that he took out of porn magazines, and he'd leave these collages on his grill, getting that much closer to his fantasy of actually cooking and consuming human meat. And then with the sudden appearance of the internet back in the 1990s, right around 1998, Miewes began frequenting online forums centered around cannibal fetishism, using the alias of Frankie and the username Anthrophagus, and styling himself as this butcher. And a lot of the time, he would post about his interest in killing, dismembering, and cannibalizing other people, but he also noted he fantasized about being cooked and eaten by somebody else himself. Fast forwarding a little bit now, we're in the early 2000s, and Miewes posted more than 60 online advertisements on a forum Nulo, which was dedicated to fantasies of emasculation and similar male genital mutilation. The advertisements written in English would state that he was looking for a well-built 18 to 30-year-old man to be slaughtered and consumed. Several people responded to the advertisement, but inevitably they would back out. But it should be noted here that Miewes specifically requested volunteers and did not attempt to force on anybody anything against their will, meaning he wasn't planning on just murdering somebody. He wanted to find somebody who would openly allow him to assist a suicide of sorts. The ads also appeared on another site called Cannibal Cafe, which is primarily centered around the fantasy of cannibalization of women. And at the same time, in addition to his own posts, Miewes would scour advertisements by other people who claimed they were willing to be killed and eaten, chatting at length with two specific users, and though neither ultimately followed up with their offer, both were pretty wild. One user named Luke self-identified as a 20-year-old Austrian man, stating his family was going to undertake the slaughtering instead of Miewes, set for January 7, 2001 during an Orthodox Christmas. So it kind of sounds like something out of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And then another user named Matteo, who was a middle-aged Italian man, originally agreed to be whipped to death and grilled with either a flamethrower or two portable electric heaters while nailed to a St. Andrew's cross, but then reconsidered due to the cannibalization aspect. So this guy was all about getting whipped and burned to death, but he drew the line at being eaten, apparently. So at Matteo's request, Miewes converted a part of his attic, which formerly held a smoke chamber, into a slaughter room. He furnished the room with a metal bed frame, a foldable table, and two nightstands, one holding a comic and the other containing air fresheners, in addition to the two heaters and the cross. Miewes decorated the room with two rubber mannequins, a hatchet, a cat of nine tails, and a self-crafted whip, and also a cage big enough to put a human being inside of. He then soundproofed the walls with a mattress and particle boards, all while Miewes ultimately only sent pictures of the room to Matteo. He ended up using the attic for future sexual encounters because Matteo at first was like, well, I guess we can meet up and still have some fun, but he got super weirded out by this weird, slaughterhouse sex room. Anyway, back in June of 2000, Miewes met a guy named Jorg Boos, a 31-year-old hotel cook from Fusen, going by the username of Meat Boy. Boos had similar fantasies about butchering and cooking another human being, becoming a frequent chat partner on the cannibal group chat on Yahoo Messenger. Boy, the good old days. They agreed to meet in real life in following autumn, and after 2 regular meetups during the following October, Miewes convinced Busse to slaughter sessions. The first slaughter session occurred on November 12th at a hotel in Cassel. Miewes engaged in foreplay by slathering Busse with olive oil and drawing circles on his naked body, telling him where he would cut meat from. They talked about edibility of 2 acquaintances of Busse, which offered to bring them to who offered to bring the 2 people to Miewes to be knocked out unconscious, dismembered, and eaten by the pair. During the second meeting on the 19th of November, at Miewes' house, Busse left early after seeing the slaughter room in person for the first time. So it sounds like the slaughter room is a little bit of a turnoff for people. On February 5th, 2001, nearly 1 year after Miewes first posted his cannibal advertisements, Bernd Brandes, a 43-year-old bisexual engineer from Berlin, finally answered one of Miewes' advertisements using the alias Cater99. So Bernd Brandes was born on the 19th of January, 1958, in Berlin-Schöneberg, as an only child to a wealthy family. Now, Brandes' father was a physician and his mother was an anesthesiologist working at the clinics in Berlin-Zerlandorf. In 1963, his mother died in a traffic collision during a vacation in Silt. After a police investigation, though, they found evidence that potentially the death may have been a suicide disguised as an accident, likely stemming from a guilt trip due to a medical error that Brandes' mom had made the prior year, which led to the death of a patient. After that, Brandes' father never told his son about the true circumstances of his mother's death, which, according to psychologist Klaus Michael Bier, resulted in Brandes' developing anxiety issues. Brandes was subsequently raised mostly by an au pair hired by his father, to whom he grew distant from after remarrying an employee at his doctor's office. Psychologists said that his negative relationship with his stepmother contributed to his abnormal psychosexual development and wish for a personal castration, later compounded by self-hatred for his own sexual orientation. Brandes excelled in school, attending additional mathematics and fine art classes, as well as receiving awards in swimming competitions. He graduated with an average grade from Erich Hoppen Gymnasium and studied at the Technical Institute University of Berlin, also called the Technische Universität Berlin. Nailed it. Don't send any emails. And he finished his degrees in both control engineering and electrical engineering on the 3rd of November, 1983. So, outside of all his, personal troubles, the guy's incredibly smart, incredibly capable, and he graduates with some pretty good accolades. Brandes went on to work for the telephony sector of Siemens since 1981 and gained an executive position as division chief in Berlin Siemensstadt in 1992. And by now, this guy's annual salary is right around $82,000 a year, which is the equivalent of somewhere around $190,000 American right now. So guy's not doing too terribly bad outside of this mental anguish. But sadly, even though he was financially well off, once he came out as being bisexual publicly in 1990, his dad pretty much cut off all communication with him, and sadly, Brandes became pretty depressed. Despite his financial success, Brandes was increasingly unhappy with his life due to interpersonal difficulties, and his worsening relations with his father ended with the elder Brandes cutting off all contact with his son after coming out in 1990. And then for a period of about 7 years, between 1987 and 1994, Brandes was actually engaged to a woman, but the couple ended up breaking up after a discovery of Brandes having been cheating on his fiancée with another man during a business trip to the U.S., and from then 1995 to 2000, Brandes lived in Berlin, engaging in casual sex dates from gay bars, as well as maintaining romantic relationships with several women from Germany, the U.S., and at least one from Nigeria. So again, this guy's kind of out there living his best life, right? He's kind of having different relationships, trying to just kind of continue to move on from this insatiable appetite for this self-mutilation. But what's interesting here is that just like Miewes, according to both his female and male partners, they all stated that Brandes showed no interest in masochistic practices during intercourse or relationships with any of his partners. So it kind of, again, staved off that insatiable quest for the castration. But instead, unbeknownst to them, during the same time frame of dating both men and women in his relationships, he solicited the service of male prostitutes for requests such as biting during oral sex. An anonymous Tanzanian sex worker recounted that Brandes once instructed him to cut off his penis with a knife, but the sex worker refused and used the blunt end of Brandes's knife, thus without cutting the skin. But anyways, between their first online communication and their first in-person meeting, Brandes and Miewes had a near daily email exchange for a month, discussing their plans in detail. Contrary to most media reports, though, Brandes had no desire to be eaten, but instead only had a desire to be castrated. So for the course of the month, they both talk about what they want to accomplish. Miewes wants to eat a human being. Brandes only wants to be castrated, so the two are trying to formulate a plan of how both of them could come out winners, right? Following so far? So in turn, to accommodate Miewes' cannibal fetish and Brandes's in turn, to accommodate Miewes' cannibal fetish, Brandes agreed for Miewes to castrate him and let Miewes then eat his penis. Because Brandes previously spoke of being so fearful that undertaking such a mutilation himself could lead to him being involuntarily committed, he was willing to be killed and consumed by Miewes after the act to avoid humiliation of things if they went sideways. So this guy is so into the idea of a castration, he's actually going to let Miewes consume him, cannibalize him, just so he can experience the act of being castrated.
So how would one go about cooking a penis, do you think? Is there a cookbook? Can you buy like Hannibal Lecter's 101 Ways to Saute a Dick?
I'm hearkening back to mountain oysters and escargot, right? Because I'm picturing a wang is pretty much muscle and blood and tissue like a sponge, right? So kind of like a worm or a slug or a snail, you don't really want to like overcook it because it's going to get super chewy. So I think like a light saute with some garlic and some butter is probably what you're going to lean towards, right? But like it's going to almost be consumed probably like a little raw, like a little medium rare, maybe. I don't know.
So medium rare sauteed penis.
Because then, like, you got to wonder too.
Dick jerky.
Dick jerky. Yes. Do you cut it off when it's flaccid, or do you cut it off when it's erect and then tie it off real quick like a sausage? You know, I don't know, man. Otherwise, we're just talking about just a rubbery mushroom, I think.
Oof.
Well, the day before he left to visit Miewes, Brandes sold his car. He wiped all the files from his computers, and he took the day off under the pretense of getting a hair transplant, and then placed a handwritten note in a cabinet, leaving all his property to his 25-year-old boyfriend, Rene J. And Rene told authorities that leading up to the time of his disappearance, Brandes didn't seem to be acting any differently, and he actually invested quite a bit of money in several high-end electronics for his residence. So there's no obvious signs that he was planning any potentiality to have himself killed, or he wasn't acting like he was going to self-harm. But then on March 9th, 2001, at 10:40 in the morning, Miewes and Brandes met at the Castle Wilhelmshoen station, and Miewes initially planned for the two to live together for a little while to get to know each other for a few days, but Brandes insisted on the slaughter having to occur that same day. He was into it. Don't talk me out of it. Let's just get it over with. They drove to Miewes' house in Woesfield, where they cuddled and made out on a mattress for several hours. Then they set up video equipment to film the mutilation of Brandes, where Miewes had prepared 6 sharpened knives, a hatchet, and a meat grinder for the act. Additionally, Miewes has downloaded and translated a step-by-step guide for the butchering of a male human. As per Brandes' original wish, Miewes first attempted to bite off Brandes' penis, but he failed. Too chewy. Miewes asked to use a knife instead and had Brandes drink 180 milliliters of alcoholic Vicks Metonate cough syrup to induce slowed breathing and extreme tiredness to ease the process. All jokes aside, folks, please do not try any of this. Do not drink cough syrup. And, if you're feeling any sort of mentally ill, please seek help. Brandes first decided to cancel. Then Brandes decided to cancel, believing his partner was too benign to actually hurt him. But Brandes changed his mind soon after a return from buying a ticket at the bus station. So basically, after a failed attempt to bite off the wiener, Brandes is like, you know what, never mind, you can't cut it, literally, and so I don't think you got it in you. And so he kind of packed up and went to the station to get a ticket home, but then changed his mind. On the way back, Miewes stopped by a pharmacy and bought a 20-pack of Vivinox sleeping pills and another bottle of cough syrup, which Brandes consumed at least halfway of each. At the house, Brandes claimed that that the intended effects were not kicking in from the sleeping pills and the cough syrup, but that he was also instead having a mild hallucination of moving animal shapes kind of off in the distance. Brandes drank some of the schnapps to calm himself down and was later determined to have had a blood alcohol content of 1.4%. At around 6:30 p.m., Miewes made his first attempt at castrating Brandes. Because he had a difficulty cutting into the flesh, Miewes then used a sharper blade to cut off Brandes' penis. Brandes cried out in pain, but was also dismayed that the sensation was not nearly as intense as he had hoped for. After Miewes bandaged the wound, the pair attempted to consume Brandes' penis together. Brandes apparently tried to eat some of his own penis raw, but couldn't because it was just too tough. As he put it, it was chewy. Miewes then fried the penis in a pan with salt and pepper, wine, and garlic. He then fried it with some of Brandes' fat, but by then it was too burnt to be consumed by either man. So, you definitely want to go kind of medium when you're cooking a weenie. According to court officials who saw the video, which has not been made public, Brandes may have already been too weakened from blood loss to eat any of his own penis. Disappointed by this outcome, though, Brandes told Miewes, "If I hold out until morning, we can still have my balls for breakfast. You get one, and I get one." I get one. Miewes then Brandes a bath before going to read a Star Trek book, while periodically checking on Brandes every 15 minutes, during which Brandes lay bleeding in a bath, drifting in and out of consciousness, and after 2 hours, Brandes returned to the slaughter room to sleep in a bed. Shortly after, between 3 and 4 a.m., Brandes attempted to get up to use the restroom, despite Miewes saying he didn't mind if Brandes urinated in the mattress. When Brandes stood up, he immediately collapsed from blood loss, and believing Brandes had then died, Miewes proceeded to tie him to a table and begin cutting off parts of the body. Miewes noted later that upon reviewing the video footage, Brandes may have actually still been breathing at this point. After long hesitation and prayer, Miewes then proceeded to kill Brandes by stabbing him in the throat, after which he finished dismemberment and hung the body from a meat hook. The incident was recorded on a 4-hour videotape, which has never been released to the general public due to the gruesome contents. Or screenshots, though, allegedly did make it from the videotape and supposedly can be found online. I do not recommend you try to find them. Also, it should be noted the credibility and validity cannot be proven. Miewes dismembered and ate the corpse over the next 10 months, storing body parts in his freezer under pizza boxes and consuming up to 20 kilograms, that's 44 pounds, of Brandes' flesh. The bones were then buried in the ground in his estate, while the head of Brandes, initially was kept in a deep freeze, was then buried 6 months after his death. According to prosecutors, Miewes committed the act for sexual pleasure. For his part, he claimed that he had now assimilated with Brandes, and that after consuming his flesh, he possessed better English and math skills from consuming Brandes, who was clearly much smarter. The family of Brandes did not report him missing, and a missing report by his boyfriend was then made on March 12, 2001, but police found no leads after he left Berlin. Then later, between 2001 and 2002, Miewes arranged between 30 to 40 slaughter meetings with people he met online. Most of the men aged in their 20s and 50s, aged from their 20s to their 50s, and were described as well-educated and high incomes. They met Miewes in Woestfield and Kassel, but sometimes he would drive to their location, including Hamburg, Dresden, and the Netherlands. The majority backed out for more drastic practices suggested by Miewes, being only interested in role-playing scenarios, but some participants with BDSM fetishes allowed themselves to be tied up, strung up on blocks, and hung with the block and tackle. Miewes voiced a preference for young, lean males with blonde hair, but pursued every offer he would receive. At least 4 men had agreed to be slaughtered, but all backed out after realizing that Miewes was actually serious about the offer. Andreas from Regenburgwas, hung upside down, stabbed with a pin. There was a guy named Andreas who was from Ragenburgwas, was hung upside down and stabbed with pin needles that signed fillet and ham to different parts of his body, covered in plastic film and lunch meat, but decided to break off the slaughter since he didn't want to actually die, instead eating pizza and drinking beer with Miewes during the evening. 26-year-old Alexander from Essen volunteered to be killed, but insisted on being decapitated on the spot. Miewes didn't go through with it because the victim was too indecisive and fat for his liking. Then later on December 7th, 2001, a 37-year-old man named Thomas had a leather and boot fetish and was locked in a cage and strung upside down, but also voiced no desire to actually be slaughtered. In June 2001, Miewes again met with Jörg Busse, who sent Miewes photos of his colleagues and repeated his offer of bringing them over to be eaten. But this time, Busse voiced a particular dislike for one of the men for being named sous chef as a new hire in place of him, and had also somehow obtained nude photos of the man's stomach. Miewes specifically refused these requests because he insisted on knowing these people and these participants being willing people. After repeating the same foreplay from their first meeting at Busse's apartment in St. Jorgen, they met again at Miewes' house on the night of November 4th, 2001. Busse was shaved of his armpit and pubic hair, and in the same tub Brandes had bled out in the night Miewes... blah, 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 blah. In the same bathtub Brandes had bled out in before Miewes consensually tied him up and strung Busse upside down in the slaughter room. Miewes repeatedly asked Busse if he would like to be slaughtered in place of his acquaintances, which he repeatedly denied. The pair stopped the hanging play when Busse complained of a sore ankle and the room being too cold. The two continued to meet on and off for the following year. The last slaughter meeting took place on July 14, 2002, when a 27-year-old Dirk Moeller, a German-born hotelier from London, arrived at Miewes' house to be sentenced to death by cannibal court and to be eaten as punishment. But he also backed out after being shown a video of Miewes engaging in the pulley hanging of Busse. And on the 6th of October 2002, a fifth man, Stefan from Kassel, with a consensual non-confetishism, was tied up and drugged with chloroform, but not harmed. And then a final man, 22-year-old Daniel from Kassel, met with Miewes twice, the final time on the 5th of December 2002, and had his buttocks and thighs repeatedly bitten by Miewes. But for the most part, however, Miewes would invite men for non-slaughter-related meetings for sex on average twice a month. So, fortunately for them, nobody really wanted to be killed and eaten. It was all just foreplay and fetish. But let's rewind a little bit here, folks, as we kind of near the end of this tale. Back on July 9th, 2002,
it's never fun to eat your own balls.
No, I can't imagine it would be, buddy. Back on July 9th, 2002, a 23-year-old Austrian university student from Innsbruck, browsing online using a search engine with the keywords horror and nervous thrills, happened upon one of Miewes' new advertisements and wrote an email to Miewes asking if he had actually killed anyone. When Miewes answered and that he indeed had murdered somebody, the student responded with disgust and disapproved. And then on the 27th of October of the same year, the student actually reported Miewes' email address to the authorities on suspicion of a potential homicide. Wiesbaden police took 2 months to identify Frankie as actually being Armin Miewes. And then 5 days after his last hookup, Miewes was subjected to a house search on the 10th of December, 2002, and agreed to enter police custody in Bad Hersfeld for questioning. Investigators found the slaughter room in his attic and the remains of Brandes, portioned into 3 separate bags in his freezer. But they couldn't identify it as human flesh at first glance. They thought it was just random bags of meat. The bags were nevertheless confiscated and sent in for analysis at the Institute of Forensic Medicine in Gießen. Meanwhile, during the 3-hour interrogation, Miewes admitted to the exchange with the Austrian student and admitted that he would, as written in his advertisements, he would actually kill somebody with their express permission, but refused to answer any questions pertaining to the suspicious meat found in the residence. Based on these responses, Miewes was charged with representation of violence, but then released since there was not enough evidence to keep him in custody. That same day, Miewes called his lawyer, Harold Ermel, and confessed to the murder. Miewes was advised to contact police, who he repeated in his confession, and agreed to turn himself in at his lawyer's office in Rottenburg. Then on December 11th, police recovered the body parts in the yard and personal belongings of Brandes. Only the head, hands, and feet, and a few of the bones were found. Miewes had pointed out to the burial locations and handed a wristwatch that was owned by Brandes he wore at the time of his arrest. In total, 1,742 diskettes, 228 video cassettes, 221 hard drives, 16 personal computers, 95 CD-ROMs, and 23 magnetic tapes were all confiscated from Miewes' home. Of these, only 21 of the cassettes were deemed case-related. That same evening, 2 Hesse state police officers reviewed the tape, but didn't watch it completely, reasoning they had satisfied the evidentiary requirements by transcription of the mutilation and active killing alone, with no need to watch and document the dismemberment. On December 13th, police conducted a second search of Miewes' property with sniffer dogs to ensure no other body parts were buried. On the 19th of December 2002, the case was passed to the Hesse LKA, and a special investigation commission was formed. Brandes' funeral would then be held the following year at a secret location outside of Berlin to avoid coverage by the press or media and future defacement by vandals. It was only attended by Brandes' boyfriend, a few of their friends, and some police officials, doubling as security. Around 430 internet users were found on Miewes' contact list on the Cannibal forum, with those living in Germany being questioned while those residing abroad were left alone. Most of Miewes' later partners were identified, of whom one was criminally charged, Jörg Busse, facing legal actions on suspicion as an accomplice conspiracy of murder for offering to provide victims to Miewes, but the case was suspended, with a monetary fine and compulsory psychiatric counseling imposed on Busse. While he was jailed, Miewes was diagnosed with schizoid personality, but deemed mentally fit to stand trial. While in jail, Miewes sold the rights to his story to the German magazine Stern. During the interviews, Miewes initially described his actions as assisted suicide. In a letter to Brandes' boyfriend, Miewes wrote that he expressed deepest condolences, but also that the act of killing was a beautiful death, which Brandes had wished for years. The trial acknowledged the agreement of the victim as not occurring under force, but emphasized that this did not make the act of killing legal, with special consideration for Brandes' impaired mental state, possible further altered by his intake of sedative drugs at the time of his death. And during the trial, a 19-minute snippet of a 4-hour-long tape depicting the murder of Brandes was played. On January 30th, 2004, the Regional Court of Cassel convicted Miewes on manslaughter and sentenced him to 8 years and 6 months in prison. The case attracted considerable media attention afterwards, and when speaking to a German newspaper, Miewes admitted to cannibalizing Brandes and expressed regret for his actions. He added that he wanted to write a biography and aim at deterring anybody else from following in his footsteps. Websites dedicated to Miewes started appearing after his 2002 arrest, with people advertising for willing victims. They should go for treatment so it doesn't escalate like it did with me, said Miewes. While in prison, Miewes had since become a vegetarian, and from prison he kept correspondence with criminologist Petra Kleggs and a former neighbor from Woestfeld. Then, on April 22, 2005, the German federal court ordered a retrial after prosecutors appealed for Miewes' sentence, arguing that he should have been convicted of murder because he killed for sexual gratification, a motive proved by his having videotaping the crime. The court ruled that the original trial had ignored the significance of the video in disproving the argument that Miewes only killed because he had been asked to kill. His retrial began on January 12, 2006, and a psychologist stated that Miewes a psychologist stated that Miewes could reoffend, and he still had fantasies about devouring the flesh of young people. On May 10, 2006, the Ohio Regional Court for Frankfurt AM, Maine, convicted Miewes of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment. Holy shit.
Holy shit.
Yeah, holy shit indeed. So, yeah, that's one of those things you discover when you're surfing Reddit at 12:30 in the morning and you happen upon holy shit subreddits. Because that's what I found, and I thought, you know what? That seems like podcast fodder.
Things I should have been doing, like sleeping. Instead, I was looking up a guy eating his own balls.
That's what happens when your boy takes a sleeping pill a little too late. So yeah, there you have it, man. Well, in other somber news, I told Leslie we would announce it on the show. After serving our community for several years, CD Trade Post, now known as Trade Post, has officially announced they're closing their doors in March. So if you're in the Wichita area, please stop by at least one last time. Give Leslie a hug. Tell her that the podcast sent you in, and just, give them a formal send-off. Right now, they're doing 40% off everything in the store. So make sure you pop in there, take a look around. You might find something you like. Long live physical media. And I just want to say thanks to Leslie and John both, because they've been huge friends of the podcast since almost, I think, the beginning. And they've treated us pretty well. Done a lot of fun shows at the Trade Post. And kind of a bummer, man, but told her I'd drop that on the podcast. So if you're in the Wichita area, make sure you stop by and see him before March. All right, man. Well, I think that about wraps it up on episode 354. Got anything for me for Big Dobbs?
Hey, you need a beard, want a beard? You want to grow a beard that's not going to make you want to cut your dick off? Go over to BigDobbsBeardBomb.com. Use promo code PXLPARA for 20% off your order, and get yourself some scents like Bay Rum, Fresh, Citrus, Mint, Classic, Sweet Tobacco, Spartan. Get it all. Get it at Dobbs. Use the promo code. Give yourself some facial love.
There you go. All righty, everybody. And also in the Wichita area, stop by and see our friends over at paranormal.cafe for a coffee and a scone. With that, we will catch you guys next time. Let me raise this glass of water because your boy's working on himself. And I'm going to say cheers to the weird shit in the world and those of us who love to talk about it.
Stay spooky and stay on the paranormal highway.
Ooh, fancy.
The cast at Pixelated Paranormal would like to thank you for listening to this week's episode. Pixelated Paranormal is here to tell you tales of the fantastical, the strange, the unknown. Tales that will move you a little further down the paranormal highway. If you'd like to share your own listener story, we would love to hear it. Email us at pixelatedparanormal@gmail.com. Again, that's pixelatedparanormal@gmail.com. We'd really love to hear from you. Again, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Pixelated Paranormal, your guide to the unusual and the strange.